I'll share my screen.
Yeah, you can start sharing and presenting.
Is the full screen visible? Hello?
Yes, see, I
Yeah,
can.
your screen is visible.
Okay, okay,
You
yeah.
can start presenting.
Okay, so good afternoon, all. I would like to thank our principal, sir, HOD of the Zoology Department, Thomas, sir, Jayashankar, sir, Putul, ma'am, and teachers who have given me the opportunity. I have tried hard to express my views and experiences to explain this topic, conflict mitigation. So kindly bear with me if I make a mistake. So, what is mitigation? So, all of us know that there are human-animal conflicts taking place in most parts of India. But we have to take care that these conflicts should not cause deaths or any sort of damage to the humans or the animals. Thus, mitigation of wildlife conflict is for reducing the severity, seriousness, or painfulness of the impact caused by the conflict. I guess all of us are familiar with this image. This is a wildlife corridor. So, I'll move to the next slide. Okay. So, what is human wildlife conflict? So, when there is interaction and then disturbance is caused, conflicts are bound to take place. So, human wildlife conflict is the interaction between animals and people, which results in a negative impact on people, wild animals, and their habitat. So, these are some of the causes of the human-animal conflict. Due to habitat fragmentation and shrinking of habitat, there is encroachment in the forest lands. So, people and animals are increasingly coming into conflict over living space and food. Encroachment in forest
Yeah,
lands by local.
sorry
Yeah.
to disturb you, but we are the first slide.
Oh, okay. You're the first slide.
I think it's moving.
It is.
It was. Yeah. What is human wildlife conflict? Yeah, that's the third
Okay.
slide. Yes.
Yeah. Now
Uh,
I'm on causes of conflict.
and you got to go to the slideshow mode.
Yeah, yeah.
It
But
was moving in the right direction.
okay, so I guess maybe she had some connection issue.
Exactly.
Okay, okay. So you can see the full
Sorry,
screen
my
now,
bad.
sir. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Proceed. Proceed.
Yeah. So encroachment in the forest lands by local people has also resulted in the shrinkage of wildlife habitats. And this encroachment basically happens on the fringes of the forest, and it has also increased the pressure on the limited natural resources which are available. Um, and there's disturbance due to collection of fuel wood, fodder, and water from the forest. And again, this is one of the reasons for man-animal conflict increase. So the area under cultivation around the wildlife habitats and the changed cropping patterns have contributed to the increase as well. Poaching of herbivores. This poaching of herbivores or the wild ungulates results in the decrease of the prey base of the carnivores. So they wander in search of food in other villages in the villages around the forest. So this and also increasing population of livestock like the cows, goats, pigs, etc. These have outnumbered the wild herbivores and within the protected areas. Thus, the livestock too has become an important source of prey for the predators. Then, climate change is also one of the main reasons for conflict. Did the slide change occur?
We are in causes of conflict.
Okay.
Yes.
So these are some of the impacts of the conflict. So loss of life, injury to humans and animals takes place. Crop damage when animals enter the in the cultivated areas on the fringes of the forest. They damage the crops. Loss of livestock. Since the carnivores find the domestic animals easy to prey on, they will hunt them. So loss of livestock happens. Damage to human property. This happens not only because of huge animals but also of due to some small ones. And disruption to daily life is also one of the impacts. Mm, So these are some of the common mitigation measures. So habitat loss and degradation and fragmentation are the root cause. Thus, we have to find long-term solution for these problems. Crop patterns have to be checked. Good standards of waste management are important because this is to avoid to attract the wild animals to human settlements, and these animals should be prevented by being artificially sustained by the human-induced food availability. Then the population of the wild ungulates, namely hares and wild boars, this can be increased so that the prey base for the wild carnivores increases. Forest corridors linking protected areas must be maintained, and they should also be created where they don't exist. Compensation for livestock loss, property damage, or any sort of loss faced by the stakeholders, they should be given compensation. Even though these are temporary solutions, they help to calm the anger or the conflicts in some amount. Capacity development of forest officials is important because they should be able to retain their skills, tools, equipments, so that they can do their job completely. Education and training activities at different should also be taken up, and this helps in building the local capacity in conflict resolution and increasing public understanding of man-animal conflicts. So I would like to present about this reserve and the coexistence, human leopard coexistence in this reserve. I have called it a unique case, but the reason for calling it that, all of you would eventually get to know through the presentation. So this is a research paper published last year on human leopard coexistence in the Jhana Forest Reserve. I am proud to say that I have a small amount of contribution in this paper since I have volunteered here and helped the researcher, Mr. Swapnil Kumbhojkar, for a time period of a month. This paper gives us an idea about how the mitigation measures were held, what is Jhalana's situation regarding human leopard coexistence or conflicts. So Jhalana Forest Reserve represents the characteristics of the island biogeography, which is in the heart of the Jaipur city, and this area is engulfed by 18 villages. So this is also a city of 3.1 million people. And out of these 18 villages, 93% of the population has encountered leopards. 83 were fully aware of its role in the ecosystem. Most of the population here is Jains and Gujars. So these are the communities that believe in non-violence. And 100% of them stress the necessity of conservation to save the forests. 91% supported the efforts to a wall in the reserve in order to prevent human encroachment. The authorities, the most important thing is that the authorities here, they view the villagers as stakeholders, and this is the basis for continued human leopard coexistence. So a few of the problems which are faced in the past centuries, the leopard populations have suffered. So this was mainly because of habitat loss, fragmentation, and reduced conflict with humans. And the researchers also believe that the main reason is exponential increase in the human population and encroachment of human activities in the wilderness. So since we humans and the carnivores, we have similar needs like protein rich diet and large homes, thus the competition increases and eventually this leads to conflict. So leopards also need larger areas, and that's why they roam around and they are prone to killing the living stock, the livestock. So, how did the researchers approach the mitigation measures? So, India in particular, there are very few studies where the authorities have attempted to understand the attitudes of the population. So, populations which are living in immediate vicinity of a top predator. So, by attitude, I mean that how the people react to the interaction between them and the wildlife. So, considering this, the people were questioned, the villagers around the reserve were questioned, and also the researchers hypothesized that due to the relatively low level of education and poor financial status of the local residents, responses would be of animosity and a negative attitude. So surveys took place, And like after they decided on this approach, they went on with the mitigation measures. And so the surveys took place to understand how the leopard encounters changed the attitudes of the people. So 10 questions to 15 villagers from 18 villages each were asked, and these questions were asked in the local language. So the questions were like, are you aware of the leopards in the immediate vicinity? Have you suffered personal loss directly or indirectly related to leopards? Are you aware of any benefits from the continued existence of the leopards? Such questions which are easy for them to understand and they could relate with it and answer them. So, one thing they took care of was the mutual trust. So, mutual trust is important since it encourages villagers to voice opinions frankly. So, for this, they involved volunteers who were born and brought up in the same villages. And they knew the villagers and who also knew the villagers. So, since the villages are small, everyone usually knows a person from their village. So, this helped identify the truth, and the volunteers could relate with the incidences. They could also tell if the people were truthful or not, and this was because since they had all the information about the area. So in the 18th century, people have coexisted with the leopards, and thus the current generations are very well aware of the importance of the leopard, its survival, and ecotourism. They're also aware of the indirect benefits of preserving the forest in the heart of the city. After the researchers also got to know that not too much of the cattle loss had taken place, since the leopards mostly prey on the stray dogs and pigs. And this was also told by the villagers, and it was also observed by them. So it was later on found that the attitudes of the people towards the predators were usually positive, and this was because they had coexisted with them for a prolonged period. Since ages, they have been coexisting with these leopards. And this this image you can see here, it is of the two tribes, Batoro and Banyoro. So these are the tribes which are from Uganda. So they have a similar case. So these tribes continue to hunt and collect food, firewood, and medicinal plants in spite of sharing the habitat with wild carnivore species. So even in Jhana, the people and their families encounter leopards on a regular basis and do not consider leopards as a threat. In villages of Jhalana, poaching is not encouraged by the elders itself. The villagers themselves have built water holes for the leopards and for them to quench their thirst during the dry seasons. The main reason for such tolerance level or no animistic attitude towards the leopard was the religion in that area. So the religion here is mostly Jainism. And this is a prominent religion of Rajasthan. And this religion preaches coexistence and non-violence towards all living beings, no matter how insignificant they may seem. So this was also one of the main reasons for the villagers to have tolerance level and such a prolonged period of coexistence with the leopards. So till date, there has been no report of fatal loss, and except for one where a goat was taken from a cattle herder's herd. But we also have to remember that the tolerance level will depend on the number of predations, attacks, and harm to the livestock and property. And as soon as a case will come forward, fear will generate, and people will be more hesitant. But so far, it is peaceful there. So the efforts of the forest department, the conservationists, and the awareness of the villagers through social media, this continues to conserve the reserve. The people have been made realize that this is the only leopard reserve in India, and they are proud of it and ready to conserve it. They do understand the intricacies of environmental service and future planning. This is a point that one needs to build upon and to involve these stakeholders in conservation. So this is what the researchers looked at. The researchers very well understood that since these villages are the stakeholders and having their positivity is something which is most important for the conflict management, they decided to involve them completely in the mitigation programs. So considering this, people were told that if this population is not conserved and if all of the current population of leopards vanishes, then even after introducing a new same species, they won't have the same relationship with each other. And because of this, the coexistence would take a new turn, or the balance would be disturbed. So this the villagers obviously did not want. So I would like to would also like to tell a bit about the villagers because these villagers have been reaping direct and indirect benefits from the existence of the forest. They have enjoyed the environmental benefits of the forest as well. They not just know that this forest is present in the heart of the city, but they are also aware of other life cycle gains derived from the forest. They know that the forest cover is protected from indiscriminate, illegal, and commercial exploitation because of the existence of the leopard. The villagers appreciate the support and efforts taken by the Rajasthan Forest Department (RFD) in preventing illegal recreational activities and other harmful practices of the locals. One thing which I have noticed there is that the people from the village and the government have a very good understanding amongst each other because not a single person has had a negative opinion about the RFD, nor has anyone opposed it. So the fact that the villagers have requested to build a wall in Jhalana Forest Reserve, this indicated that they know that the wall will help preserve and protect the forest cover from felonious and harmful practices, and also harm to humans or the animal. So when these people are asked about a future without the forest, none of them could imagine it, and they felt really sad about the thought. So when I would roam during my volunteering period, when I would roam in the city to get some samples from a lab or do whatever work I had been asked to, or even in my leisure time, all the local people whom I would interact with seemed to be very proud of having that forest. And it was just amazing to see how attached everyone was. Even the rickshaw drivers to up to the small kids knew the place, and they would at least ask me to visit it once. So, in other parts of India, the situation might be very different. It is rather very different. And although the ecotourism is recognized and its importance too, rest of the things or the connection with the wildlife does not exist as much, and the stakeholders are unclear with their social responsibility. So this is not the case with Jhalana, and that is why I had said that this is a unique case altogether. So, to conclude with, for any conflict mitigation, if it is taking place, the most important things to understand are these, which are we need to realize who the stakeholders are. We have to see how it is affecting them. Do they realize the importance of the ecosystem, the animals, or the animals there, or the forest? What are their attitudes and understanding about the animals? What role they can play and how they can help us in conflict mitigation? Are they given the right compensation for any sort of loss they face? It is also important to involve them in the conservation and monitoring all the conflicts. It is important to sensitize them towards wildlife if they are not, and how are they being benefited is also what we have to see. So this is what I understood from my visit there and the whatever research papers I have read so far and my understanding. So that's all. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Sia, for sharing your
Yeah.
insights. I
Thank
now
you.
call upon Dr. M. Jaisam, Professor, Assistant Professor, Department of Zoology, to moderate the session. We will now be taking questions from the participants.
Yeah. We are left with another 7 minutes. The next speaker, Ms. Sagarika, has also joined us. But we'll have some questions from the participants addressed by the presenters. So if the participants have any question, they can either unmute or post it on the chat box. The topic is diverse, similar to the diversity of fauna, conflicting fauna that are involved. They presented here. We had a chance to listen to an example of an herbivore and a carnivore conflicting with human, and what mitigatory measures, initiatives are in place involving the authorities concerned and the local community are put in place to minimize that conflict. So conflict or interface encounter, it is in that regard. If there's any question, the participants can post it on the chat box or raise your hand. Uh, just to get in some mode of discussion, both of you, mm, Sia and Manjari, what extent was the local community participation, acceptance of the fact that there is conflict, and their active involvement in accepting initiatives to minimize this conflict? What did you sense on the ground? If you could share some points on that.
So can I go first?
Yeah.
So the NGO had organized many activities for the children, and even the adults actively participated in it. And the success rate was very high to influence the children so that they could start to make them fall in love with elephants and in that. And also because of the incentives provided to the local villagers for growing crops for the elephants and for monitoring the herd movement, they have started to accept and realize that elephants are a part of the nature and they have the equal importance as the humans have. And so they have wholeheartedly accepted our actions. Thank you, sir.
Okay. If there aren't much question, we can take. Okay, there's a question. Building a wall around a forest is a bad idea in the participants' opinion because leopards need a lot of space. What do you think? See, yeah, this is the Jhana initiative that you were talking about.
Okay, so yeah, like there were a lot of discussions taking place about whether to build the wall, and because at some point it was the leopards could actually cross the wall. It was not a problem for the leopards, but the other animals like the nilgai or the hyenas, they could not do it. So there were a lot of discussions taking place whether to break the wall which was built or whether to keep it. But for now, they have kept it, and as of now, it hasn't changed the situation much. But I don't know, it's just the infrastructure in between the forest. So the leopards are free to roam basically. Rest the nilgais and everyone, the other animals cannot cross the wall.
Okay, that itself is a problem.
Yeah.
Bringing parallels to here in Bandipur, Nagarhole. Yesterday there was this photo in the newspaper. The railway line fence that is being put as one of the barrier for preventing elephants to move out of these protected areas is causing havoc. That many elephants, especially bulls, trying to cross over, and they're caught in between and die. So
Mm.
is that a good idea? Is a question many wildlife experts have raised. Such initiative, already there is an elephant-proof trench. Then there is this rubble wall being made. Then there are solar fences, three barriers in place where there is this high-level conflict. Sagarika is our next speaker. She can throw light on the Bannerghatta initiatives that are taken. Even I'm talking based on that. Both of us being associated with Arusha. And then the fourth one is this the railway line fence that is being put. If you Google all of you, you could see how that bull elephant tried to cross and died. Is creating this problem, having a barrier, and to what extent restricting these population to a given landscape because they need to move, especially if it is the breeding season. They got to move out to bring about the genetic recombination. If not, there is an inbreeding set. So, and also food resources may not be stable. They need to move out. But in the process, if there's a conflict, how are we going to mitigate? I believe that is what has to be focused. But as you say, this is not such a totally impermeable kind of a barrier. It is porous in a way. That's what you tend to say. To identify or to demarcate the protected area and the human habitation. If I'm right, what you said. Yeah. Any other questions? If there aren't any, we are now starting with the second speaker, the next session with Sagarika, a scholar from Hong Kong. University. So now, after that, if there are questions related to conflict, will also be taken together at the end of the second session. Now, over to the volunteers to introduce our second speaker for the day.
I guess Akila is doing that. Akila?
Hello.
Yes, sir. Can't hear you.
Hello. Yeah. I just lost connection. Yeah. Are we introducing Sagarika, the second session?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. Proceed.
So the next speaker for today's session is Sagarika Falke, a PhD candidate at the University of Hong Kong, and is working on human captive elephant interactions across Southeast Asia. She began her research career at Bannerghatta National Park, working on projects which focused on captive elephant welfare and human elephant conflict with Arosha, India. Her interest lies in understanding and improving conditions for wild and captive elephants within the Asian context. Welcome, Sagarika Falke. Over to you, Miss.
Thank you so much. Since I'm not very familiar with Microsoft Teams, I'm just going to try and share my presentation. How does this work?
Uh, Dr. Putul is the right person.
Because it says only meeting organizers and presenters can share, but that
1
I
minute.
think that
Oh, it's my role also. Yeah. Yes. I made you the presenter, Sagarika. You can proceed.
okay, great. Um,
You can now share.
okay, I'm just going to try and figure out. Yeah. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. So, like Dr. Jaishankar mentioned, I'm no stranger to St. Joseph's. I think I've had a long association with St. Joseph's and Dr. Jaishankar through my work with Arosha and Bannerghatta. And today I have been asked to talk to you about conservation management strategies, specifically with regard to captive breeding, population reintroductions, and translocations. And I understand that you have all already been through a 1 hour session. And I want to sort of make this as interesting for you as possible. So this presentation that I'm going to be doing is less about technical aspects, but more in terms of the practical implications or the practical considerations of these three terms in the field. Because I mean, I'm not an academic, although I'm doing my PhD. I am more of a field person, and that is what is interesting to me about these three concepts, and that is what I hope to sort of give to you during this presentation. So it's going to be more of case studies across the world, specifically focused on India, because a lot of you would be aware of these stories. And then to just sort of tie that into what is the scientific implications of these three terms. So, kicking off the presentation, I am going to be talking a little bit about the jargon of what these three terms means, because I think it is important. I think as scientists, as academics, as science students, we use a lot of jargon, which is good because then it helps us sort of differentiate between very sort of finely terms which are very close to each other but are very distinct from each other as well. So talking about translocations, the difference between translocation and relocation. So this term is basically, translocation is when you sort of move an animal from one part to its native habitat or its range, whereas relocation would be when you move an animal within its range. So say, for example, in Bangalore, I'm sure many of you know that there are a lot of reports of snakes coming into people's houses. And then what they do is that they call up the BBMP, the wildlife cell, they send a snake rescuer over. That person captures the snake and then moves it maybe 500 meters or away from the person. So in that case would be a relocation, which is very different from a translocation, is where, say, for example, you're moving population of wild dogs from South Africa to Kenya, which is way up north in Africa. The next terms are reintroduction, repatriation, reinforcement, and rewilding. And these are very closely linked terms, but they are also very distinct from each other. So, for example, when you're talking about reintroduction, it is sort of introducing a species that has into a habitat which was maybe its native home range or its range in the past, but may have sort of died out because of local extinctions due to hunting or habitat changes, or because of anthropogenic changes caused by humans. Repatriation is basically the same thing as reintroduction, but it is there's a sort of conflict in the scientific community where they say reintroduction is really not the right term to be using, because introduction means that you are introducing a species that was there, but technically you're sort of bringing back the species, and sometimes a lot of them prefer to call it repatriation instead of reintroduction. Reinforcement, on the other hand, is, say, for example, strengthening a current population that is very vulnerable. So in the example that we will be seeing later on, wild dogs from South Africa were moved to Mozambique. But there was already an existing population in Mozambique. It's just that it was a very vulnerable population because it was very small. There was a lot of genetic inbreeding that was happening. So therefore, in order to strengthen that population and bring in some sort of genetic diversity, they had this wild dog population moved in from South Africa. And the next concept is rewilding. So rewilding, I think, is a very broad concept, because when you talk about reintroduction, when you talk about repatriation or reinforcement, it is very species specific, or it's very individual species specific. But rewilding is a broader concept, which I would like to think about in terms of trying to sort of regenerate or bring about ecosystems rather than just an individual plant species or an animal species. And then you have captive breeding, which sort of speaks for itself, where you are basically managing or breeding populations of animals in human care with the intention of maybe reintroducing or repatriating them back into the wild at some given point in time, or with the intention that knowing that certain populations of animals in the wild are vulnerable and could have extinctions in the future, and therefore you're sort of creating the stock in captivity, which would then maybe be introduced back into the wild. And these, like I said, these terms are very different from each other because they have very different functions. But a lot of the time, they are also very connected. So, say for example, like the wild dog population example that I was talking about. So, when you move the wild dog from South Africa, it is considered a translocation because you're taking that population away from South Africa. But then you're introducing them into Mozambique, which could be then construed as a reintroduction because you're sort of reintroducing this new population. So they are very distinct terms, but at the same time, they are also sort of very interconnected with each other, as we will see later on. So one of the biggest things that, initially when this whole concept of reintroduction and management sort of came about was that is it science or is it just wildlife management? So the first reintroduction actually happened in 1907 when the American bison were sort of brought back into the American prairies. And during that time, the people who did that thought that, okay, let's just take this population of bison and just, put them in the wild, and then nature will take its course, and everything will go out well. But when we sort of go through these case studies in the presentation, you will realize that it's a more sort of nuanced term. It's not just about moving animal from place A to place B. There are a lot of scientific considerations that we need to take into place. For example, animal behavior, the species that you're moving, where are you moving them to, which then need to be more sort of based in science rather than looking at it as a management tool. So initially, yes, it is still a management tool, but I think the sort of discourse has changed over time, where there are now much more scientific methods that are being used. So for example, I don't know whether you can see my mouse. So the IUCN has now come up with guidelines for introductions and conservation translocations for different species. And they've actually, in 2018, they came out with case studies across the world where animals were reintroduced into the wild. So, and this is a very interesting thing if you have a chance to go through it, because it talks about individual case studies. It talks about some of the challenges that people faced when reintroducing or translocating animals, and whether the project was successful or not. The other thing is talking about captive breeding. Zoos across the world. So zoos, as you know, have moved away from just a tourist destination for people to a more sort of scientific thing where they look at genetically managing and breeding endangered animals in captivity. And they have come up with this sort of network, which is called ZIMS, where they are doing more scientific research into stud books, so which animal or which individual was born to whom, who has mated with whom, and so there's this huge plethora of information with regard to these animals being managed in captivity. And it's not just about managing them in captivity, but it's also looking at its significance when you're talking about reintroductions, because then genetics and genetic variability then become very important factors to look at in those situations. So why do this? So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about these three terms, which is reintroductions, captive breeding, and translocations. One, like we spoke about in detail, is to maintain genetic diversity. And this is the case of the Florida, which was a very closed population in Florida. And it was thought to be a distinct population from the puma but and there was a genetic bottleneck because this animal was sort of closed in this habitat, and it didn't have a chance to move and interact with other populations across America. So what they did was they introduced some individuals from another population in America to Florida to sort of then prevent this inbreeding or to prevent this genetic bottleneck. The other example is protecting vulnerable populations or maybe even creating a secondary population. So I'm sure all of you know about the case of the Gir lions and the Asiatic lions in Gujarat, where there is a huge struggle that's going on between the Gujarat state government and our national government, where we realize that, again, because this population of Asiatic lions is very, very vulnerable, because it's only found in Gujarat, and any small disease can wipe out this entire population, which would mean that the Asiatic lion would be extinct. But on the other hand, the Gujarat state government does not want to relinquish its hold as being the only place in the world where you have Asiatic lions, and therefore they have stalled this process, even though the Supreme Court has given the order that the lions have to be relocated to Madhya Pradesh. The other thing is, of course, mitigating conflict in terms of animals or certain individuals coming into human habitation, causing economic loss to the local communities, and also sometimes causing death and injury to people as well. So in terms of moving animals away from so-called non animal or wildlife zones, in quotes. The other is, again, to prevent extinction. So case study of the Great Indian Bustard, where we only have about 100 individuals left in the wild. And WII has now sort of started this conservation breeding program where they are planning to set up centers across North India, I think. I know Madhya Pradesh is one of the centers. And they are going to sort of hatch chicks and then release them back into the wild. So, like I said, it's sort of progressed from this phase where you are looking at it just from moving an animal from place A to place B. There are, of course, a lot of considerations that you need to take into account when you are looking at these three concepts on a practical sort of scale. So you have questions like, how many individuals do you translocate or reintroduce? What is the demography of these individuals that you are planning to translocate or reintroduce? Which population do you choose to pick out individuals from in cases of reintroduction or translocations? To which populations do you add them to? Where are you within the habitats that you have chosen? Where are you going to move or release them? Is there a particular cause them more conflict? When is the best time to do it? Whether it's during the breeding season of the species, or whether it's during the summer months or monsoons. So, there are, of course, a lot of questions that you sort of need to think about when you think about these three concepts. And of course, everything is very species dependent. So, reintroduction of maybe a reptile like the gharial would be very different, or the questions that you would be asking would be very different, let's say, from the reintroduction or translocation of rhinos. So it is very species dependent. It is very dependent on the animal's behavior, the biology, and also the sort of habitats where you are planning to sort of relocate them to. So coming to these three concepts in a little detail, and like I said, I planned this presentation because I wanted to sort of give you these case studies, give you these stories, and then for you to sort of think about the practical aspects or how you would go about it, rather than just looking at the scientific literature, which I'm sure all of you can sort of go and read for yourself. But looking at these case studies and then thinking about what are some of the practical implications of doing them, what are some of the problems that you might encounter. So again, translocations, like we spoke about, it's to sort of maintain genetic diversity. Like I was talking about the wild dog population, which was moved from South Africa to Kaningia National Park in Mozambique. And they did this because they wanted to sort of create, so there was already this group of wild dogs that was there, and they wanted to sort of reintroduce this other group and try to sort of create these subgroups from the reintroduced species and from the individuals that were already there. The other is, translocation of invasive species. So this is the grey squirrel, which has sort of taken over much of the UK and Britain. And it was introduced from America. And this was, of course, as you all know, that the Americas were at one point in time a British colony. So somebody thought, let's take this fuzzy animal and, put it into Britain because it'd be nice to see it on our lawns. But unfortunately, this animal has sort of taken over the country, and it's also sort of taken over the habitat of the native species, which is the red squirrel. And the red squirrel is not doing so well. And, they are, because they have to fight for competition with this larger and much more aggressive, gray squirrel species. So what the government has started doing now is that every time, so they've informed citizens that every time you see a gray squirrel, call up this number, and somebody will come over and they will trap the individual and then either translocate it back to captivity or to sort of move it somewhere else. Then the other thing of translocating is removing, so in quotes, problem animals. And this is the very sort of infamous case from Bangalore, where the leopard got into Vibgyor School in Whitefield. I'm sure all of you would have, would know about it. And unfortunately, because of, the department was unable to manage the crowds, the situation sort of got very tense, and it also got violent, where this animal unfortunately injured a few people, and then it sort of was captured and put into the rescue center in Banarkata. So translocations, predominantly what we sort of hear in the news, are mostly in terms of human-wildlife conflict, where animals are sort of moved from one place to the other because they are causing problems, or there is a huge economic loss, or injury caused to humans as well in these areas. So this is a picture of a rhesus macaque that was actually sitting on my front door one day. And these animals are found, bonnet macaques and rhesus macaques are found quite predominantly in urban setups. As you all know, even in Bangalore, we have quite a few of them hanging around in the urban areas as well as the rural areas and the marketplaces. So what happened is that there are quite a few translocation stories of macaques across India. So there were some that happened in Andhra Pradesh, there were some that happened in Uttar Pradesh and in Himachal. So macaques seem to, because they have this huge plasticity which allows them to adapt to different environments, they often, come into conflict with humans in urban settings as well. And then, people say that they don't belong here, and therefore they need to move to more wildlife-friendly areas. So that is what happened. And there was this huge drive, somewhere 5 years ago, 6 years ago, where a lot of macaques, rhesus macaques from, cities such as Jhansi, Agra, they were moved to places like Dehradun and, the hilly areas and the outskirts. But what happened then is that these animals, they started becoming a problem in the areas that they were translocated to. And the reason for this is that the translocations were not done in a very scientific way. So what happened is that the macaques in urban environments are found in very, very large troops because resource in terms of food is very plentiful. So you have larger troops that sort of occur in these areas as compared to their natural environments. And what happened is that in order to sort of split them up, they took smaller groups of individuals within the larger troop and then released them in different areas. Now, this created a lot of stress for the animals because, of course, they were, put into a new environment where they didn't know where anything was, where they didn't know where the resources were, they didn't know where food was. And of course, this created a lot of stress for the animals. And it also brought them into conflict with the existing individuals that were already there here. So then, the territorial fights, sort of skirmishes between troops. And then these individuals that were translocated became very aggressive. And then they started getting into conflict with people. And there were even a few cases where, macaques were known to run off with babies or bite people or even throw stones at, one particular individual. So therefore, in that case, they started then thinking about, okay, so now what do we do that we have these problem translocated individuals? And then they came up with this thing of culling, which was very fiercely opposed by animal rights activists and conservationists, because it was technically not the animal's fault that, they were brought in from place A and dumped in place B and then, sort of made to sort of fend for themselves. And then these strategies such as sterilizations and immunocontraception sort of came about. So what I'm trying to highlight in this particular point is that when you're looking at translocations, you need to be very careful about the species that you are translocating because macaques are social animals. When you split the group, it creates a lot of tension. It creates a lot of intergroup, changes because there is a specific dominant structure that is found within macaque systems. And then this sort of adds to the stress and to, exacerbating the issue rather than it acting as a positive conservation tool. This is another case which I was a part of. So this elephant was one of our study animals in Bannerghatta, and so Bannerghatta was his home range. But he and a group of 10 other male elephants sort of formed this group, and they would go to Tumkur, which was a non-elephant habitat. And there, they raided crops. They got into a lot of conflict with people. Some people also died. Some people were also injured as a result of these elephants being there in this, non-forested habitat. So what the government decided, because there was a lot of political pressure, there was a lot of public pressure as well to remove these elephants from Tumkur. 2 animals were captured and they were sort of put into captivity. And they were sort of trained in captivity for about 3 months, after which they were shifted to an elephant forest camp in Karnataka. Looking at this, I was, when I was going through this presentation, I was like, this is a very interesting concept, because what would you consider when you take an animal from the wild, put them in captivity? Would you consider it a translocation, or would you consider it a relocation, or, is that a completely different term in itself? And, if you're interested, maybe you can type your answers in the chat box and, just to sort of have that discussion, because it sort of falls into both, but it neither falls into both as well. So, this is an interesting concept, and it is a concept that is growing because we have a number of individuals from different species that are sort of coming into conflict, and capture and putting them into captivity is becoming a norm in some ways. But at the same time, we also know that it has both benefits as well as it has costs to the animal as well. The next concept is captive breeding. So, why do captive breeding? So, one is to establish and maintain sustainable populations. So, this image is of the pygmy hog, which was rediscovered in Manas National Park in Assam in 1971. And before that, it was thought to be extinct, or there was not much known about the animal in the wild. And then they found this population, and then they established this breeding center in Guwahati, and now they have gotten to the stage where they have started releasing these animals back into Assam, in different parts of Assam, and then sort of tracking them and monitoring them and seeing, and keeping an eye on the populations. The other is ensuring genetic purity. So, captive breeding also helps you sort of introduce species back into the wild that have sort of genetic mixes. So, this is the study of the Scottish wildcats. The Scottish wildcat is, again, one of small wildcats that is found in Scotland. And what happened during human colonization is that there were a lot of feral cats that were there. And they started breeding with the Scottish wildcats. And this sort of created this whole new strain of cats that were half domestic and half wild. So it completely changed the genetics of this animal. So what the RZSS, which is the the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, they started maintaining these Scottish wildcats in captivity, and then selectively breeding them with purer individuals. So to be able to sort of create that genetically pure strain, which then can again be reintroduced back into the wild. The other is, another reason for captive breeding is reviving extinct populations. So I don't know how many of you remember, there was this very, very sad story about the last northern male rhino dying. I don't remember when it was, whether it was 2018 or 2017. But basically, he was the last northern male rhino that was there. And although that there are two female northern rhinos in somewhere in Kenya, they are unable to sort of reproduce. So what scientists thought was, when this male rhino was dying, is that this was the last chance to be able to hang on or to be able to create this population. So they extracted sperm from him, and what they are planning on doing is this in vitro fertilization, using the eggs from the female white rhinos, and then sort of using the population of the southern white rhinos to act as surrogates. So it's a very interesting sort of concept. How practically viable it is another discussion altogether. But this was one of the things, because after these two female northern white rhinos die, that is the end of the population. There aren't going to be any northern white rhinos left. So in some ways, captive breeding is also about reviving extinct populations or populations that might go extinct. This was just to sort of share with you. This was a gharial breeding center that I visited when I was working in Nepal. And it was very interesting because the government of Nepal sort of set it up. Because, of course, as you know, the gharial is a very endangered reptile, both in Nepal as well as in India. And this is because of, changes in habitat, sand mining, changes in the riverine systems, overfishing. So that there are a lot of challenges that this species faces in the wild, and has also caused a lot of local extinctions in parts of its habitat. So the government has set up this breeding center. We have a lot of breeding centers in India as well, for the Gharial along the Chambal. And it was very interesting to see. So they had this. So these, just to sort of tell you about it. So they had these different sort of cages, and individuals at every growth stage. So when they were hatched, they were sort of housed in a separate cage. When they became maybe 1 year old, they were shifted to another cage. And then this extreme picture on the right is when they were fully grown adults. And some of these female were kept for breeding purposes, so laying eggs. And then some of these younger individuals were then sort of, once they were of a particular size to prevent predation, if they were released too young, once they were of a particular size, then they would, be released back into the wild. This was another very interesting concept that actually I hadn't heard of until I saw it for myself. So there's this thing called vulture restaurants. And first time I heard of the term, I was like, this doesn't sound right. But the reason why these restaurants it's not a restaurant per se. It's not like where you can go in and they, serve you vultures. But it is a restaurant for vultures. And it is to sort of maintain their populations. It is to sort of support breeding centers that house vultures as well. So again, this was in Nepal, and again we do have vulture restaurants in India as well now. So what the Nepal government did is because they had about 9 different species of vultures. Not indigenous, but 9 different species of vultures that were found in Nepal. As you all know, that because of the use of diclofenac in cattle, these vultures would eat the carcasses of dead cattle and then they would die. And diclofenac was used because of to treat cattle because of disease or whatever. So the medicine diclofenac. So this sort of caused a serious decline in vulture populations across India as well as Nepal. So this was a very interesting concept that was set up by BirdLife and the Orbitan Society as well. Sort of it was a community-based program. So what they did is that they told villagers that we will maintain that cattle, and kept that cattle till the cattle died of natural causes. Then what they would do is they would take that the carcass of the cattle and put them out into these feeding sites, which would then attract these vultures. So basically, these cattle were free from pesticides and diclofenac because they were being maintained by this organization. And this also then sort of bought in vultures because they were getting this free source of food. So that was one aspect. But they also did have a breeding center where they kept quite a few species of vultures, and then they would slowly release them back into the wild. So I have a video for you. I don't know, hopefully this plays. So that is a fresh carcass that is there, and there are about 4 or 5 different species of vultures that you can actually see. And you can see that they've all been tagged. That's the yellow thing on their wings. And this is actually one of the breeding sites. So once they hatch, they keep the fledglings in these cages so that they get used to seeing wild vultures as well. And eventually, once they come of age, then they are sort of released back into the wild. So that is the vulture restaurant and the breeding program. The next concept is reintroductions. Oops. So why do we do reintroductions? And again, like I said, because these concepts such as reintroduction, translocation, captive breeding are very interlinked in a way. So a lot of these examples or these case studies might seem a bit repetitive to you, but like I said, they are very distinct in their terminology. Therefore, I am going to talk about it. So this, like I was telling you the story about the gray squirrel, which has taken over a large part of Britain and the UK, and this is the species that it is sort of threatening, which is the red squirrel. So one way of reintroductions is, so while you're translocating or moving the grey squirrels away from the UK and Britain, on the other hand, you're also trying to reintroduce this native population of red squirrels that have been there but have been sort of taken over by this other species. So it's reestablishing locally extinct populations. Also restoring wild extinction. So this is the Arabian oryx, and this is like considered the poster child of reintroduction successes. So the Arabian oryx was sort of found to be extinct in the wild. And then through captive breeding and reintroduction, they have now a healthy population of about 300 or 400 individuals. And then the other thing about reintroductions is because of alterations in environment. You may have, like say, for example, along the Chambal, there are certain pockets that are more affected by anthropogenic activities versus others. So, these alterations in the environment, you can move animals from maybe less viable habitats to more high viable within, the same range. So this is a very short video. I'm sure a lot of you would have sort of seen, but I think it's a very beautiful story about the changes that reintroduction can sort of bring about when a species comes into an ecosystem. Trying to figure out how to get back to my presentation. So that was a very sort of positive story about how reintroduction sort of changed the course of of the animals being reintroduced, but also they changed the entire ecosystem that they were sort of being introduced into. So there was this sort of a top-down trophic cascade for top predator. They sort of influenced the smallest of the creatures, birds, and possibly insects also that were found there. There's another sort of quick reintroduction sort of story that I would like to tell you about. So last year I was asked to sort of comment on this paper, which and the authors proposed that they wanted to take captive elephants that were used in the tourism industry in Thailand, and they wanted to sort of reintroduce them back into the wild, and to sort of create a population of wild elephants based on these captive elephants. So this was the proposal that was there, and there were various people who have done work on captive elephants or wild elephants who were asked to sort of comment on this paper on the proposal. And while it does seem a very sort of a positive thing, and one of the reasons as to why we do captive breeding in the first place, there are a few challenges that we need to think about when you are talking about this concept of reintroduction or rewilding of elephants. In this sense, rewilding, I think they meant reintroduction, but it's just a different term that they used. And one of the things that I spoke about in my when I made a comment was that you need to look at the species. So now elephants are they're known as gardeners of the forest because they are very destructive in the sense that they pull down trees to get at the leaves and shoots. So they sort of sometimes open up forests because of their foraging habits. And what happens is when you take a population of elephants and then introduce them into an already degraded habitat, what sort of impact does that have on the ecosystem at large and on other animals that are found within that system as well? The other thing is that because of the background of these elephants, so these elephants were basically predominantly begging elephants, so they were taken up on the streets. They were forced to beg from tourists, or they were in these tourist camps in the cities where they were, made to perform tricks. So they were brought up in very anthropogenic environments. And one of the concerns is that if you are taking an animal that has been brought up in a predominantly captive environment and you take them to the wild, what impact is that going to have on their own stress levels? Because they've never seen the wild before. They don't know where to look for food or what food to look for. So, that can have an impact on their welfare. And at the same time, it can also have an impact. They may just stay in one place and not, move around as you would probably expect them to if you are saying that, you want to rewild them or reintroduce them, because in your head, the concept of moving an animal from captivity into wild is a good thing. But at the same time, when you do that, is it fair for you to expect that the animal will do what you expect of it just because you're moving them from a captive environment to a wild environment? So that brings me to this question as to when you talk about these concepts such as reintroduction, translocation, captive breeding, how is it that you actually measure conservation success? So how is it that you say that these things are doing what you actually intend them to do? is it, whether it's by looking at the contribution of a single individual or a population of individuals? Let's say, for example, the gray wolves that were introduced into Yellowstone National Park, they definitely brought about quite a few changes that were there. Is it, the successful breeding of the first generation that has been born in the wild? Is it self-sustaining populations? Are these populations maintaining themselves, or do you see a steady growth in their populations year by year, or each reproductive cycle? Is there a sense of habitat fidelity or lack of desertion? So there was this case where tigers were reintroduced into Panna Tiger Reserve from other parts of Madhya Pradesh, and one of the males had actually strayed out of the park. One of these reintroduced males had strayed out of the national park and gone into human habitation. And there was this huge exercise by the forest department to sort of tranquilize him and then recapture him and then put him back into the wild. Because again, tigers are territorial animals, so very, very high chances of them sort of trying to get back to their own territories. There is a possibility of that happening. Or do you measure success by comparing whether the animal is behaving like its wild counterparts or its wild cohorts would do in the wild? And restoration of ecological roles and relationships, like we saw in the case of the gray wolf in Yellowstone. So, there are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of considerations that you need to think about, because a lot of times, people do think about translocations and reintroductions as very positive things, and they are, don't get me wrong. I mean, I am very sort of, hopeful about these things as conservation management strategies. But they also do come with a lot of caveats that you need to sort of look into, because they may be biological constraints. So say, for example, the behavior of the particular species that you are trying to reintroduce, what about the animal's life history? Say, for example, like I said, if they were captive elephants that were used to begging on the roads and getting food provisioned for them all the time, is it fair to expect them to, once you leave them in the forest, for them to know which tree to feed upon, or which fruit to eat, or which root to eat? So there may be biological constraints. There also may be habitat constraints. So, for example, especially with the conservation breeding of the gharial. Now, they have done very well, but at the end of the day, the same problem persists. You are still going to have, this sand mining mafia that sort of controls the rivers and creates a lot of disturbance by, dynamite blasting, which then affects the reintroduction process as well. So you may successfully breed an animal in captivity, but then if you're going to be releasing them back into the habitat which experiences the same problems that possibly caused their extinction or population decline in the first place, that doesn't sort of make for a very good plan. So, stakeholder engagement, community awareness and building, these are all aspects that probably need to be taken into consideration. And then, of course, you have species constraints, because, there've been a huge number of studies done by Dr. Vidyatreya about the leopards in Maharashtra from the Jhana district, where initially, when these leopards were found in agricultural habitats, they were sort of tranquilized and then translocated to other parts of to Maharashtra. But when they radio collared one particular individual, Ajuba, they found that he actually had come back to his native place where he was captured from in the first place. So, this again might exacerbate conflict, because then in that, because these animals are territorial, so in their sort of quest to get back to their native home ranges, they again may come into conflict with humans or come into contact with urban environments, which might be disastrous for them and the people that they come into contact with. Similarly, there might be demographic constraints in terms of what is the age of the animal that is being released. When you're looking at tiger relocations, introductions, is it better to introduce an old animal, or is it better to introduce a younger animal who might be more prone to sort of seeking out a new territory for himself any which ways. So there are a lot of sort of these constraints that you also need to take into consideration. So basically, to sort of sum it up, there are various factors that could affect the conservation management regarding these three concepts. And one, you would need to look at it from an individual level. So when you're talking about, like I said, individual welfare, stress, whether there are any captive behaviors that might sort of affect the successful reintegration of these species back into the wild. They also may be a population level consideration. So the reintroduction of Tasmanian devils, they found that once they were reintroduced into the wild, they started getting these facial tumors, which then sort of spread within the population. So are you sort of taking into account disease transmission, because that is one of a very key factors that you need to look at when you're looking at captive breeding and then successful reintroduction. And similarly, animal behavior, like we discussed in the case of the rhesus macaque troops, where they got into conflict with the existing troops that were already there, which then alters the behavior of the of the translocated individuals, as well as alters the behavior of the individuals that are already there on site. And then you have ecosystem levels. So when you're talking about reintroduction, you have this concept that the environment that you're sort of reintroducing a species into is the same environment that was there when the animal was there in the wild. But we know that's not true, because we've as students of Bangalore, I'm sure you would have seen how drastically it's changed, not just in the span of 10 years, but maybe in the span of 1 year or 6 months. I mean, you go away for a month and there's a new building that's sort of propped up somewhere. So it's unfair to sort of expect that the systems that you are reintroducing these species into is the same as it was. So they have to sort of contend with these novel ecosystems and sort of learn how to survive in these novel ecosystems, which might be different for their wild counterparts who have been sort of gradually being exposed to these changes and therefore are better able to sort of adapt to themselves. And of course, what is the impact on fragile systems? So, say for example, if you're introducing elephants into an already degraded habitat, that may sort of then worsen, the conditions for the animal as well as for the species at large. And the most important thing that we also need to consider, and I didn't manage to attend the last session, but I was there at the last bit, and they were talking about stakeholder engagement, and I think this is something very important when you're talking about reintroductions and translocations as well, because there was this very interesting book, and if you have the time you should read it. It's called Animal Intimacies. It's by Radhika Govindraj, and she talks about this problem of translocated macaques in Himachal, where the villagers feel that it is a problem of the classes, because they feel that because we are poor rural folk, a lot of these macaques from which have they assume that they've come from Delhi, which is a part of the rich urban society. And that has sort of created this whole new conflict, not just between people and the macaques, but between people and people themselves. So it's very important to sort of take into consideration the stakeholder perception, understand if you're going to be reintroducing these species, what sort of impact does it have, especially in a country like India, where we don't have that inviolate space for wildlife. Very often we have these interfaces between humans and wildlife that are, becoming increasingly common. And also sometimes it is a very sort of expensive program to breed animals, to capture them, to translocate them. And, therefore there need to be financial resources also made available if this has to go successfully. So just to sort of end with my presentation is that these concepts are extremely important for conservation success and conservation management. But at the same time, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that they are, they need to be very, very specific and very thought out and very scientifically sort of planned when you are looking at these concepts. And just to sort of end with this quote by John Muir, who was one of the um, founding fathers of the environmental movement in America and was actually one instrumental to set up the Yellowstone National Park in America, is that when we try to pick out anything by itself, that we find that it's bound fast by 1,000 invisible cords that cannot be broken to everything in the universe. And that is the same when you're looking at translocations. It's not just about moving an animal from place A to place B. You also need to take into these different considerations at the individual level, at the population level, at the human beings as well. So that is the end of my presentation. I think I've gone over time. So sorry about that. But yeah, happy to answer any questions.
No problem on that. So now the session is open for discussion, and I request Dr. Viola ma'am to Assistant Professor of Zoology Department to moderate the session.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Sagarika, for the wonderful session. It was indeed very intriguing, and the participants here also in the chat box have mentioned that they have seen a few or heard a few similar concepts of vultures in Nepal, where certain ethnicities have decided to resume sky burials in which bodies are left open for the vultures. And somebody else has here mentioned of a similar concept in Africa as well. This session was indeed very thought-provoking, and we now open the house for discussion. If any one of you have questions, you can please unmute yourself and you can pose the question, or you can initiate the discussion. The others, if you want to post your question in the chat box, you can do the same as well. There is also somebody who has read about reintroduction of the Tasmanian devil to the mainland Australia, and they are hoping it becomes a success since it's the largest carnivore marsupial there. Anybody who wants to share your views or state your agreement or share your disagreement with any of the points, it will be a healthy, open discussion. Please unmute yourselves and you can discuss.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm audible. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Students, participants can ask questions to Sia and Manjari and Sagarika. The topics are all related in a way. How conflict can be and conflicting animals subject to translocation. Uh, a broader perspective was given by Sagarika, what could be the repercussions, the issues associated with such and translocations. But at the same time, there are also silver linings where they have worked reintroduction of different terminologies that Sagarika explained to us. If you're all still thinking to ask what, I will take time in this time to thank all three speakers. In fact, all the speakers for the 3 days Young Ecologist webinar series themed on conservation biology. I should be thankful to all of them for agreeing readily to be part of this webinar and to be resource persons to speak on different relevant topics. Our students and also our good friends who jumped in to help us to be resource persons of this webinar. Thank you to all of you, all the webinar resource persons for their time and sharing information.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Manjari and Sia, would
Enough.
you like to interact with Sagarika? Sagarika's translocation concepts, the captive breeding concepts, and would you like to share in agreement or any other point to discuss? All three of you can also make it a panel discussion.
There is a question in the chat box. I'm not sure whom it is directed to, but anybody could answer this. What do you think about the captive breeding of big cats, mostly tigers and lions in Africa, for canned hunting and trophy hunting?
I'm just gonna sort of take that. So I think it's a very interesting concept, and it's also a very contentious issue and very hotly debated amongst various conservationists, because you have this one group that is completely against trophy hunting as a concept, because I think hunting should be banned. And personally, for me, I also feel that hunting, especially at this day and age, is not something that should be done. But on the other hand, just to sort of play devil's advocate, is that there is another group of people who think that hunting actually supports local communities and their livelihoods, because a lot of the times these, especially, I don't know about tigers in Africa, but in lions specifically, they do tend to cause a lot of livestock destruction to local communities, and local communities lose out on a lot of their economic, they basically they lose a lot of their money because their cows are being killed. And in some ways, this is being proposed as an alternative to sort of supplement this money that they're losing. So if trophy hunters come in, if there is a lot of money that the trophy hunters have to pay to sort of hunt this one particular individual, then that can be used to sort of compensate the losses that the local communities experience at the hands of lions killing their livestock. So it is a very sort of interesting concept. Personally, I do not like trophy hunting, and I think it should be stopped. But if you look at it objectively from different perspectives, whether it's through an economic perspective, whether it's through a conservation perspective, they all have these different viewpoints that they sort of come out with, that then sort of help you think about the situation in a much broader sense, rather than is hunting good or bad.
I think there are some more questions in the chat box. There's one interesting question on, should extinct species be revived? If there is captive breeding of current species happening, why not revive the extinct species? Just to add to that.
I think just the other day I read about this proposal where they were planning to bring back the woolly mammoth. so which was quite interesting because none of the habitat that the woolly mammoth sort of survived in is there anymore. And then if you're thinking about the woolly mammoth, then you also have to think about maintaining, as a theoretical sort of thought process, and not in any ways practical, but in terms of, the predators that used to hunt the woolly mammoth, those are not there anymore. So when you're thinking about probably bringing back, extinct species, then you also need to think about bringing back the entire ecosystem that it was probably found in. But yeah, there is conversation about bringing back extinct species. But in terms of, I think it would depend. So, say for example, if extinctions have been recent, so let's say for example, if a species has gone extinct in the past few years, as compared to 100 years ago or 200 years ago, I think that sort of makes a lot of difference, because then that sort of then ties into how successful your entire program is going to be. Because if it was 200 or 300 years ago, like the woolly mammoth, then you don't have that sort of environment to sort of sustain that animal even. So in those cases, the chances of success are going to be very low. But say for example, if you bought back, there's discussion of bringing back the cheetah to India, which became extinct, maybe about 60 years ago. That is something that could be a possibility, because if have good habitat of is given, and if sufficient protection is given to the animal, then you can sort of bring back these species that have sort of gone locally extinct.
Okay, I don't know where this question could be answered by whom. Uh, Many tribes in polar regions are allowed to hunt polar bears and seals, even though they are endangered. What are your views on this? I don't know if it local. Yeah, anybody among the panel?
So I don't know how to answer this question, but if you say many tribes in polar regions are allowed, I don't think anybody has given the tribes the permission or have asked them to stop, because I don't think the tribes exactly have the knowledge whether they have to actually hunt them or not hunt them. So maybe it's just a point of explaining them why they don't have to hunt polar bears and seals, even though because they are endangered. That is, I think, is a part of we people who actually know how is it affecting the environment, the climate, and how they might go extinct. It is, I think, our responsibility to tell the tribes, and then we also have to see how it is going to, like, there has to be something which should benefit the tribe so that they listen to us while we are telling this to them. I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong, but sir or someone can correct me.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. And there is one more question. Recently, it has been observed in most South Asian countries that lion bones are being used in traditional medicine as an alternative to tiger bones. What are your views on regulating and monitoring traditional medicine for using body parts of endangered species? If it's happening with the Asiatic lion, that's very, very pathetic. At least the tiger number is more than the lion. Anyway, both are bad. The panel, how to curb on this notion of usage of traditional medicine of animal body parts, how to educate. Probably in that lines is what the question is. I think we answered this question on the day one. It's almost about creating awareness and strict monitoring to check such illegal trade doesn't exist. All countries come together that across boundaries there are no variation in regulating these illegal trade. I believe we discussed on the day one, so that
Yes.
answers it. Yeah. So with that, thank you all the three speakers today, Sagarika, Manjari, and Sia, for your time. It just happens to be coincidence that all five speakers turn. So it's women in conservation. I did reach out to many men in conservation, but they realized accepting NSA's invitation to be part of this webinar on conservation biology. Over to the NSA volunteers for the formal vote of thanks.
For his support and being a backbone of NSA. Thank you, sir. During this pandemic, also, you made it much easier. Thank you, all the participants who attended the event, and thanks for supporting our speakers and our association. Then, I want to thank our NSA volunteers who supported us throughout. Thank you. Have a lovely evening.
Also, thanks from my side to all my department colleagues, our HOD, Professor Thomas P. Zakaria, for his constant support and encouragement in driving, in initiating all these activities as part of National Science Association. All the faculty member, it's always the Department of Zoology works as a unit. Though they're not visible, it's this background work that we all get together and we implement these things as a department. So thanks to all my colleagues in the department, teachers, for helping out in all the activities that NSA has done this year. Support, we cannot get into doing so many initiatives. Our rector, our principal, thanks are due to their encouragement in organizing these initiatives. Thank you all NSA volunteers from my side uh, for your constant work in scheduling, in terms of bringing out the brochure, in terms of the publicity outreach to get to bring your friends to participate in these webinars. Thanks to each and every one of you who was associated with this webinar. Thank you all. Good night. Hope to see you on 9th November. We have another webinar on the fishes of Arunachal Pradesh. We have Dr. Santabala Gurumayum, scientist E from the Arunachal Pradesh Regional Center